Okay, well, I think we're going to get started now. Hopefully you're in the right place. This webinar is about choreographing the enterprise sale. So if you're in the wrong place, now is the time to leave, but hopefully you're all here for that webinar. My name is Kiva Kolstein. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for AlphaSense. AlphaSense is an intelligent search engine, kind of like a Google for financial executives. And at AlphaSense, I'm responsible for all revenue. All pre and post sales teams report up into me. We've been around for about 7 years. And in that time, we've been able to win business from some of the largest companies in the world. We've already got over 700 clients, including GE, GM, Ford, Pfizer, Apple, Microsoft, nearly 50% of the Fortune 100 currently doing business with AlphaSense. And that's kick-ass. The challenge is that only a few of these companies use us across their entire firm. And we're only beginning to present AlphaSense as enterprise software designed for the entire enterprise. So most of our clients have 10 or 20 licenses with us, whereas they should have 100 or 200 or even 1,000 licenses. No doubt these companies would benefit from using AlphaSense across their entire firm. We just haven't positioned ourselves that way or taught the sales team to sell that way. And that's where I come in, to help turn our somewhat transactional sales organization into an enterprise sales organization. I've been to countless meetings over my career where the rep is telling me about the prospect for the first time before we get on the call, or while we're driving to the meeting. And we get into the room and the rep says something to the prospect like, well, perhaps the best way for me to show you the value of my product is to give you a demo. No intro, no deck, no discovery. Then we spend the rest of the meeting talking over each other while asking or answering questions, and the whole thing is just a mess. I believe that every single interaction with or for a prospect has the potential to impact the outcome of a deal. Sometimes in a big way, sometimes in a small way, but you can never tell which of the interactions will lead to a positive result. So I recommend choreographing everything and leaving nothing to chance. And I'm going to take you through some of that choreography today. This is a quick agenda, what we'll talk about over the next 40 or so minutes. I'll give you a little background on me. We'll take you through some steps in choreographing the path to partnership, and then we'll open it up for questions. Just a few slides on my background, a short story as I've been building enterprise sales organizations for a long time with some success. Here's a look at the last 10 or 12 years. I mentioned AlphaSense. Part of that, I was at Handshake as their CRO. Before that, I spent a long time at Percolate, a marketing technology platform. And before that, founded and managed the corporate markets division for Gerson Lerman Group. Okay. When sales professionals are able to choreograph every aspect of their sales process, from research to closing the deal, they set the stage for success. Think about the last time you saw a ballet or a Broadway show. There's your example of a ballet. Every dancer on the stage knew exactly where they needed to be on the stage at every moment. Hours and hours of practice went into preparing for the performance. And by the time you were in the audience and watching the show, the performers looked completely effortless, flawless. That's what sales organizations and sales leaders should strive for in meetings with prospects and clients. The challenge is that many sales professionals worry that a highly choreographed sales process runs the risk of sacrificing authenticity. It's in fact quite the opposite. Highly structured planning and pre-thought frees the seller up to be creative, to be adaptive, to be present, to be in the moment. And when sellers think of memorization, they often fear sounding robotic. But to the contrary, memorizing your lines frees your brain up so that you can focus on the performance. When you don't have to think about what to say, you can act in the moment. So that's what I like to train sellers to do throughout the entire sales process. Choreograph everything and leave nothing to chance. Okay, so now on to the choreography. This is not an exhaustive list, but should give you a sense for the kinds of things you can and should choreograph before you meet with anyone. The first is research. So we're talking about long before the meeting, even before the first call, when you're thinking about who you should be calling and why. These are some questions that you should be asking yourself. Industry. What do I need to know about the industry or sub-industry? For example, life sciences. Within life sciences, pharmaceuticals. Within pharmaceuticals, pediatric oncology. Is there anything going on in that space that I should be aware of? Or should be a reason for me to reach out? The next is company. What do I need to know about this company? What can I learn about the company that I can share on a call? And the third is contact. And we're going to come back to these three things throughout the presentation. Industry, company, contact, really important before you call anyone, before you meet with anyone. Get to know what's happening in the industry, get to know what's happening at the company level with regard to things that may be happening within the industry, and of course, get to know your contact. Use whatever means necessary, whether LinkedIn or other kinds of social media, to get to know as much as you possibly can about where that contact has been and where they're going. The next is the introduction call. Whether you're making the call, you've got an SDR, sales development rep, making the call, whoever is reaching out needs to answer some questions for themselves before they do. Why am I calling you, this contact, at this time? Is there anything that I can share that will make it a reason for you to talk to me? Do I work with other companies or other people that look a lot like you? Intro calls are about scheduling meetings, not about closing deals. So the only thing that you should be focused on is getting yourself the meeting. Don't sell on the call. Don't convince them why they need to buy your product or service. Simply sell the meeting. In terms of meeting, well, one more thing to say about the intro call, I'd say is be prepared to leave a voicemail. Know what you want to say on that voicemail. And have that voicemail be part of a cadence that includes emails and voicemails, whether you're using HubSpot or some other marketing automation tool. Make sure that the cadence includes both voicemails and emails to get yourself that meeting. On to the meeting prep. And this is sort of high level meeting prep. You'll want to go deeper, much deeper here than in the initial prep done before that call. The industry, the company, the contact. On the industry, what's happening in the industry that matters? Write this down for yourself. Talk to colleagues about other companies we might be working with in the same industry. What's happening at the company that matters? Have you met with them before? Can you connect dots within the organization? Building an enterprise sale is about building influence, building advocacy, building a business case that you can take to someone who's got the authority to sign for more than one license for an entire functional area or an entire enterprise. And so it requires that you weave your way through the hierarchy of these really complex organizations and understand how to connect dots. And then, of course, contact. Like I said before, what do you know about this person? How are they connected to the other people that you've met? How will they benefit from the specific product or service that you're offering? Next is executive prep. And this is important because nobody closes enterprise deals alone. That enterprise deals require the seller act more like a quarterback than a sales professional. And that means they're likely bringing other people to their meeting. Not necessarily the first meeting, but along the way, as you meet with different people throughout the organization, you are likely getting other folks within your organization involved in the sales cycle. And so this is called executive prep, but you can think about prepping a sales engineer or prepping really anybody who you're taking to the meeting alongside you. So some things that you want to think about as you develop a brief for this person before you've asked them to attend or after you've asked them to attend. So first, who are you bringing to the meeting? Second, what is their role? What role do you want them to play in the meeting? Obviously, it depends on who you're bringing, but the folks within your organization will play whatever role you ask them to. And so important that you figure that out up front. What is the current state? And now we're talking about the prospect. Give the person you're bringing an idea for what's currently going on inside that prospect's company. What tools are they currently using? So depending on what it is you sell, a product, a service, think about what they're currently doing to solve the challenge that you're going to suggest might be solved in a better way with your tool, with your product or service. What challenge may they be facing? You know, it's likely you're not bringing an executive to a meeting, to the first meeting. So it is also likely that you did some discovery beforehand. You've got a decent idea for what challenge they may be experiencing or what challenge they may have expressed to you they're facing. You'll want to share that with the exec. What solution do you plan to propose? Or what solution have you discussed with your prospect in that first meeting? Who are the players that are involved, not just in buying your product or service, but involved in solving the problem? And then you'll want to prepare alongside whoever goes to that meeting a likely list of questions and objections. So questions, not questions that you plan to ask, but questions that you expect the prospect will ask, and objections that you think they may raise. And again, we're talking about the enterprise sale here, so that's the opposite of transactional. All the stuff that we're talking about here wouldn't necessarily be used in a more transactional, high volume sales environment, but certainly when you're trying to sell to the enterprise, you want to prepare with a list of questions that you already have answers to and a list of objections that you know how to overcome. Okay, so now you get to the meeting, and let's pretend the meeting is at some big company campus somewhere, and you're sitting in the lobby waiting for that meeting to begin. What do you do while you wait? Do you check your email? Or are there things that you can do that might move the ball forward for you, or give you some nugget that you can use, some piece of ammunition that you can use either in the meeting or down the road as part of the latter part of the sales cycle? So I'd say the first thing you want to look at, is there an annual report? Many times companies will have an annual report sitting on the desk in front of you or by the reception area. Look at that annual report. What are you looking at if you're looking at the annual report? I would suggest you might want to look at the CEO letter to the shareholders. That's usually in the front of an annual report and gives you a good idea for overarching strategy. They're looking to take their business into China, or they're looking to open up a new market or develop a new product, right? That is usually sitting in the CEO letter to the shareholders. Read the 10K, which is in the back of the report. The point is that you can glean some pretty interesting information that you can then share with your prospect in that meeting if the time comes. If there's a receptionist, talk to that person. Find out what they know. Ask them some questions that you prepared in advance. If there's a timeline of the company history on the wall, look at that as companies have IPO'd or products have been developed, or there's been M&A activity over the course of time. These are all things that you might want to use, that you might be able to use in your meeting. Okay, you're now getting set up in the room, and your client or your prospect asks you if you want coffee. Do you say yes and allow them to go to the kitchen and get you a coffee? Do you say yes and go get a coffee with them? I don't necessarily have an answer for you here, but you should think about it and not wing it. So know whether or not you're going to take the walk with them to the kitchen and get your coffee alongside them. And if you do, what are you going to talk about? What if they begin to ask you about your company? And yet there are 5 other folks in the conference room waiting for your meeting to begin. Do you begin the pitch while you're walking to the kitchen? Do you say, I don't want to steal my own thunder, I'd rather wait to get back to the conference room? Point is, you need to be prepared for that. Next, where do you sit? Where do you position yourself and where do you position the prospect? In Sales 101, you'll hear that if there's a great view, you'd want to give that view to yourself and not to the prospect so that you don't distract the prospect with the great view. But there are other kinds of things that you might want to consider. Are you sitting next to them? Are you having them sit near the screen if there's a projector? If there are several of you and several of them, are you sitting in between them? Rather than one side is vendor, one side is prospect. Okay, the technology. What happens when the technology fails? It's inevitable. The technology will fail. The projector won't work. You'll have forgotten your power cord, or you'll have the wrong dongle. What do you do? If there are two of you, have you planned for that in advance? Is one of you beginning the introduction phase or sharing an elevator pitch while the other sets up the technology? Or do you all sit in the room silently waiting for the IT person to arrive? Next is introductions. Who starts? Do you start or do they start? I would argue that you want to start yourself because you're going to ask them questions throughout their introduction about the role they play, some of the challenges they may be facing, some ways that they've thought about solving those challenges. And there's a logical next step moving from the introduction of the last person on the prospect side who you've just asked them questions of and who's just shared some very specific challenges that leads you directly into your presentation, as opposed to the awkward transition that would happen if they began their introductions with a back and forth of questions, and then you introduced yourself and then had to awkwardly move to an introduction of your company. So important to think about introductions. And then as it relates to the questions, the best time to do some disarming discovery is during the introductions. So it's likely that you come prepared for a meeting with a deck and a demo. And it's also likely that before the deck begins, you're going to go through some light discovery because you probably have only been given an hour for your meeting. And so how do you stuff in discovery, a deck, and a demo into 1 hour? And how do you force the prospect to sit through your discovery as opposed to, and want to answer your questions as opposed to feeling as though they're being interrogated? One way to begin that process is to do a pre-discovery discovery. It's a sort of like a hidden trick is you begin going through discovery while they're introducing themselves. You can ask questions about their role, questions about how they're connected to other people in the organization, questions about how the work that they've just described that they're responsible for traces back to the overarching strategy that the company is employing that you read in the annual report when you were downstairs, CEO letter to the shareholders, right? This is all stuff that you can do as part of the introduction phase. They're just introducing themselves, and yet you've gotten some really good information before real discovery begins. Okay, then you introduce yourself, or you've begun by introducing yourself. I just said that. So introducing yourself actually comes first, and you want to come up with a personal thesis. And the personal thesis is designed to establish you as a thought leader. And the reason why you want to establish yourself as a thought leader is so that you earn the right to become a thought partner over time. And so it is important that you practice, first write and come up with your personal thesis. Why do you work for this company? What excites you about the work that you're doing for this company? What other kinds of companies like the one that you're sitting with right now are currently doing business with you? Where do you spend all of your time? So that you establish yourself as a thought leader, as someone who has earned the right to sit across the table from some senior executive who's then going to make a decision as to whether or not to buy your product to solve their problem. And you've also earned the right to become their thought partner throughout the course of the sales cycle. And perhaps even beyond the sales cycle, because most enterprise sales organizations believe in land and expand throughout the entire life cycle of that client. So that first license or the deal that you're doing today is hopefully not the last. You want to be their thought partner over time. Next is discovery. This is absolutely the most important part of the entire sales cycle and the most important part of your meeting. And this is where you gather up all the ammunition that you're going to use in the inevitable fight. Most sales cycles end in a fight. You reach the latter stages of the sales cycle. You've put them in late stage in Salesforce. You've actually forecasted them to close this month or this quarter. And when you reach that final stage, they begin to argue with you on price. They begin to tell you about the signatory who's gone on vacation, or the fact that they need to bring this up at the board, or priorities have changed, or any number of different things that lead to this deal slipping into next month or next quarter, or going away completely. And so how do you prepare for that inevitable fight? Well, this is where that happens. And so I would suggest, if you've not been taking notes already, this is what you want to write down. Current state. What's currently working, what's not? Tell me about your business. What tools are you currently using? What challenges are you facing? And more important than the challenge is, what is the quantifiable impact these challenges are having on the business? Now, this is a tough one, because many times the person with whom you're meeting won't know how to quantify the challenge, the impact the challenge is having on their business. And so you're going to have to work on that together. Sometimes you can use client voice and share with them some other, how some other clients with whom you work have expressed this challenge, the impact this challenge is having on their business. And other times you can simply have a conversation about it and ask them some additional questions about the specific challenge and the impact it's having. What might be an ideal solution? So far we're not talking about your company, and you shouldn't be talking about your company. You're simply talking about their company and the challenges that they're facing, the impact these challenges are having on their business, and how they might go about solving this specific challenge, having nothing to do with you. If they were to solve this challenge, what would be the impact of success? Who are the players that are involved in solving this problem? How high up the chain does this challenge get felt, or how broad? Is it isolated to this one functional? Is it isolated to this one person, this one functional area, this one region? You know, is it an international problem? Like, how big a problem is that? And who are the people that are involved in solving this problem? How high a priority is it for them to solve? Again, not how high is it a priority for them to buy your software, your service, your tool, but how high a priority is it for them to solve the problem? When do they plan to solve the problem? How long have they been working on the problem? And then lastly, how much do they expect it will cost to solve this specific problem? This has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with your company. You are a consultant. You are McKinsey or Bain or BCG sitting across from them, understanding the business, the challenge, the impact of success, and how they plan to solve this problem. Okay. Now it is time for you to talk about you. And so you've likely come prepared with a short deck. What do you hope the deck achieves? You want to think about that in advance. Who is responsible for delivering the deck? Is it a joint exercise between the different people that you've brought to the meeting? Is the account executive taking responsibility for delivering the deck? Is the senior most person in the room on the vendor side responsible for taking the deck? Think about that in advance. And the same is true for demo. Who's delivering the demo? Do you let the customer drive the demo, or are you driving the demo? Have you certified all of your sellers on delivering the demo in exactly the same way? I would say, going back to the deck for a moment, I forgot to mention, you should also be certifying your sellers on exactly how you expect them to present the deck. And the deck with actual slides is really just a crutch. You want them to be able to present the deck without the deck. You want them to be able to sit across from somebody who asks them about your company and simply tell them about your company in the same way that the deck that you spent a lot of time creating logically lays out the story. And so the deck and the words associated with each of the slides becomes the way you want everyone telling the story. The last thing I'll say about demo is, in order to have the demo really come alive, you should have customer use cases that you can litter throughout. So as you click through the demo, or the customer clicks through the demo, you can share stories for how this specific feature is used by this kind of client to solve this specific challenge, and here was the result. And so we'll get to casual use cases in a moment, but the point is that glossy case studies that have been created by marketing are great for sharing post-meeting or sending by email. But you and your sellers need to be armed with frankly dozens, but at the very least 4 or 5 casual use cases that they can just litter throughout the deck in the demo. Next is questions and objections, and I talked about this a while ago, but once you've been to a bunch of meetings, you have a decent idea, especially if you can bucket questions and objections by either title or functional area or vertical. You begin to know the questions or objections that will get asked or raised in a meeting. And if you're meeting with a pharmaceutical company, or you're meeting with an industrials company, or you're meeting with a financial services company, there are likely questions or objections that they will raise, perhaps different from another vertical. Or you're meeting with someone who may be a VP of this or a director of that. Depending on title or role, depending on functional area, depending on vertical, you'll have questions and objections that you should be prepared to answer. And I would suggest getting into a room with all the folks who are attending that meeting, coming up with a list of questions, the list of objections, and practicing not only the answer, but who's going to answer. And this is, again, back to sort of that AE serving as a quarterback, but the AE should serve as a quarterback. And so you should decide in advance who's going to take which question. So for example, the AE takes questions on pricing. The CRO or the CEO takes questions on the vision for the future of this company. The sales engineer takes questions on roadmap. The point is that everyone has a role to play, and when a question gets asked or an objection gets raised, there is no confusion around who should be responsible for answering that question. Now, if a question gets asked or an objection gets raised that hasn't been prepared for, and that will definitely happen, the AE serves as the quarterback. They should be the one to say, hey, that's a great question. Jim, why don't you take that one? And so everything flows back to the person responsible for running the meeting. Next is casual use cases. We talked about this, but just again, important to underline. This is what brings your product to life. You have to be able to talk about how other customers are using it and the value that they're receiving as a result of. So we talked about getting to the end of the sales cycle and there being this inevitable fight. The most important part of winning that battle is getting to value over cost. And so or the ROI. And so your casual use cases should be with a focus on value over cost. What value are these companies getting as a result of buying your product or service? Next is closing to an action step. Don't simply wrap the meeting and go, but make sure that you're closing to an action step. What are the very specific next steps that you'd like to take, customer? Or here is what I'm thinking in terms of what we want to do next. What are your thoughts about that, Mr. Customer? What I like to do is, there are 5 people in the room. We've spent the last hour talking a little bit about you, a little bit about us. We really didn't get into the specifics about the work that each of you is responsible for, some of the challenges that each of you may be facing. And so what I'd like to do is follow up this meeting with just a 15-20-minute call to each of you to do that with each of you separately, if that's okay. And then last is a plan letter. And the plan letter is designed to recap the meeting and to get to a mutually agreed upon path to close. And so within the body of the plan letter, you're going to recap the meeting. You're going to remind them of what you heard with regard to the challenges that they expressed to you they're facing, the impact that these challenges are having on their business, an ideal solution, and the impact of success. And then most importantly, the very specific steps in a mutually agreed upon path to partnership. And you send this email out to your prospect after the meeting. And it's a good idea that you copy all of the participants in that meeting. And the idea is to get them to engage in any way, right? So they might say, actually, you misheard me. These are the very specific things that we're facing, or these are the steps that we decided we're going to take together. Or you might just get, thank you, that's exactly right, look forward to talking again next Tuesday. The point is, when you send a simple thank you note, thanks for the time, really appreciated the last hour that we spent together. I learned a lot, look forward to taking next steps with you. There is no meat on those bones, right? There's nothing that they can then engage with you on. And the point here is that you've spent the time with them, you've listened to them, you understand their challenges, you understand what it might take to solve these challenges, and there's very specific things that you need to do and very specific things that you're asking them to do en route to a partnership together. So that is it. It's not an exhaustive list. There are more steps for sure, but that should give you a sense for the way I think about choreographing a sale. And I apologize if it was difficult for me for you to understand me here. Most of the time that I spend with the sales team on choreography is workshopping each of these steps and getting sellers to understand exactly what needs to happen at each of these stages, as opposed to delivering this as a presentation. So hopefully you get it, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. Okay, so I'm looking at the questions that are coming through. One of the questions is, and I'm just going to take all of them and we can kind of go through them together. How is all of this different if you're still looking for your first pilot? No customers yet. So I'm gonna, without engaging that person in a back and forth, I'm going to assume you're going straight to the enterprise. Many companies start with a more transactional sales model and move to the enterprise. If you've got no customers, yet you expect your first customers will be enterprise customers, I would suggest all of this still applies. The only thing that you're not going to be able to do is deliver use cases, examples of customers who are currently using you and getting value out of the product, the service. And so I would say you probably want to share expected use cases, expected value. Not a bad idea that you create some kind of ROI calculator that you can use alongside your customer. But I would say in terms of choreographing the sale, very little will be different for me if you're going for customer number 1 or customer number 100. Okay, next question. How many times do you suggest leaving a voicemail or sending an email to a potential client for the intro call? Well, you'd want, first of all, I believe in building a cadence. And so there should be a very specific set of calls and emails for every one of the prospects that you're trying to sell to. And so I don't know that there's a specific number. At AlphaSense, we have a 5-call email cadence. And so it's 2 calls and 3 emails, and each of them are pre-written and it's by our marketing team. And so the sales team is responsible for rejiggering the template to support who we may be prospecting, but all the templates and the automation is done through marketing. I'm sorry, I'm just reading the next question. How do you overcome the challenge of someone saying on the intro call, they have someone else using, someone else that they are using, and they're happy with their current vendor? I'd love to learn more. Look, to me, what you're selling is a meeting. You're not selling your service or product over the phone on that initial call. And so I might want to learn a little bit more about who they're using, what the experience has been like, help them understand how we may be different from that vendor, and offer to show them in 15 or 20 minutes by phone. So you're not asking for much, a little bit about you and your firm, in the hope that one day, if there's ever a need, you can get back on the call together or schedule a meeting. In other words, I would not stuff your product down their throat. I would allow them to be happy with what they're currently using and just try to probe a bit and get some more information on what they like about it and what may be missing. Next question is, do I try to keep the presentation section short? Yes, I would say max 5-6 minutes. Really important that you spend the majority of the time on them. But I do think that a deck meant to introduce yourself, introduce your company, introduce the uniqueness of your platform in the market, perhaps a little bit about your funding so they know that you're not going anywhere. And if you've got clients, perhaps a little bit about your clients and what they're saying about you, and then jump right into a demo or more about the prospect. So the question here is how do you get that initial meeting? If I was starting from not knowing my end customers, how would I get my first meeting? You need to know your end customers. You will not get a meeting, or I wouldn't give you a meeting if you didn't have a real reason for reaching out to me. And so that industry company contact piece is super important. Otherwise, you're getting lucky. It's not really just a volume game. And so I would train a seller, I would train an SDR to really do, well, we talk about 3 and 3 minutes of research to find 3 pieces of valuable information that you can share on a call with a prospect. It won't take you very long to look at a customer's website, or a company's website, to look at LinkedIn, to look at a couple of different places where you might be able to find information about that company or that industry or that contact that you can share with them on that call. There has to be a reason why you're reaching out to them at this time. So this is an interesting question. So for earlier stage companies with not fully formed products, what is the best way to engage a large company with the understanding that the full offering is not yet ready? So I want to answer this question in a couple of ways. The first is, it depends on how not fully ready your product really is. Most A, B, C round companies are selling into their roadmap. The very best of them sell only one sales cycle into their roadmap. And so what I mean by that is if your sales cycle is 6 months and you're talking to a prospect about the possibility of working with you, it isn't unreasonable to think that you can't sell 6 months into your roadmap and talk to them about what your product will look like by the time they get started. Or you wouldn't have to say that, but you talk to them in a way that you believe the things that you're sharing with them will be fully baked in the product by the time they become a customer. But there's also a caveat to that, because you run the risk of putting all sorts of pressure on your customer success team, on your entire company, if you either win that business more quickly than you expected, or if the roadmap gets extended or reprioritized and the thing that they expected to be in the product isn't there yet. So you want to be really careful that your go-to-market strategy and your product are pretty pretty well aligned. One can't be too far out ahead of the other. And so one thing I might say is offer for them to be a beta tester, offer for them to sit on a customer advisory board, that the early customers that you bring on get advantages. And so you got to think about sort of what can I deliver to this person short of a discount for getting started with me before my product is fully baked. Sorry, how do I scroll down here? I got it. So the next question is, how do you A/B test steps of this process to see how to optimize? That's a good question. I mean, the obvious answer is you take a portion of your sales team and you put them through the process, and you take a portion and you have them do it a different way. But I would say, the process that I shared, one, isn't exhaustive, and two, isn't precious. It's just sort of my process. It's the process that I train my sellers on. I think the more important point here is just that you've got to take time to really think about every step along the way. That hand waving over a meeting that you're having with a prospect and thinking that your seller has got it covered because they've either worked for your company for a while or they know how to articulate value will not win you enterprise deals. It might win you the deal that's right in front of you. And you may get a false positive here or there by some company deciding that your product is just so kick-ass that they buy from you anyway. But if you want to scale an enterprise sales organization, I don't know that you need to do a lot of A/B testing around choreography. You really just need to think about the very specific steps that you want your sellers taking from start to finish, and recognize that every single time that you interact with that customer, you're potentially impacting the outcome of the deal. So one question here, any differences in your framework for services sales to enterprise companies versus product sales? Not necessarily. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. So I was at GLG, Gerson Lerman Group, for about 7 years, and that's more a services business than is a product or technology sale. For those that don't know, GLG is an expert network, 300,000 experts that you connect with executives to help answer big strategic decisions or questions that they may have, and you pay for access to that expertise. And so it's really a service. And I would suggest that while the actual steps that I took you through today might be a little bit different, like I'm saying, they're not precious necessarily, the concept of choreographing the entire sales process was the same. So no change there. Yeah, as founder CEO, how should we workshop ourselves to prepare for being the first salesperson? Nobody knows the business better than you do, and nobody knows the prospect universe, why you built the company, why you're selling this product better than you do. And so nobody is better positioned to articulate value than you are. And so I would say, treat yourself like a sales professional. Manage yourself against the very specific steps that I just laid out for you. But I would also say that this presentation is simply on choreographing the enterprise sale. There is a much longer conversation about customer segmentation, understanding the prospect universe, whittling down to top targets, building a pipeline, all the things that you as the founder CEO serving as the first sales professional would need to know. And so I don't want to pretend that simply following a presentation on choreographing the enterprise sale is going to be it for you. There are a number of other things that I think you'll likely need to do, but I would say I would treat in the same way that when you hire that salesperson, you're going to sales manage them, or you're going to hire a sales manager to manage them. You need to sort of do the same thing for yourself. And so sort of it begins with an understanding of prospect universe and who am I going after and why, and where the greatest opportunities lie, and what's the lowest hanging fruit, and what vertical should I be focused on first, and all of these things. And we're talking about enterprise sales right now, but there is this delicate balance between transactional and enterprise, right? Transactional sales typically keeps the lights on in the organization and perhaps funds growth in the enterprise. And so I'd be careful about going straight to the enterprise because sales cycles tend to be longer. The question is, how would you approach the CEO as the first cold call? I think the best person for you to talk to, well, look, everything depends on how you articulate value and if there is real value in your product or service to the enterprise. If there is, and I'm assuming you're on this call because you believe that there is real value, real enterprise value, then the most important person for you to be talking to is the CEO, who has the authority to buy for the enterprise and who hopefully recognizes challenges that exist across the enterprise. When you start too low in an organization, it's likely that person's purview doesn't extend far beyond their remit or maybe their functional area. And so you do want to get to the very top and begin to express the extraordinary value that this company will receive as a result of buying your product. And that resonates at the top, doesn't really resonate at the bottom. So again, if this were a transactional sales presentation, I'd be telling a slightly different story. But because this is an enterprise sales presentation, the further up the chain you go, the more strategic that person is, the more overarching their responsibility and idea for sort of what might lead to great value across a broader group. What are the typical sales cycle lengths for financial services versus companies like Ford, GM, et cetera? I'm going to have to, I can share with you my own experience. I don't have like benchmark data. I would say the average sales cycle for calling into a Fortune 500 company and selling them a $100,000 product or service is probably 6 months. That's probably a good, safe bet. The thing in enterprise selling that you don't get in transactional selling, and by transactional, I don't necessarily mean pull out your credit card and sign up for $9.99 a month. Transactional selling in the way that I'm describing it is selling your thing for $5 or $10 or $15,000 a year, whereas enterprise selling might be, I'm making these numbers up, but might be sort of selling for $75,000 or $100,000 and up, or selling to a much broader group of people. So we talked about building influence, building advocacy, connecting dots, building a business case. I think the thing that you don't get in transactional sales that you do absolutely get in enterprise is procurement and legal. And so you've got to account for the length of time your contract will sit in legal, getting redlined, whether you're going to use your paper or their paper. Have an opinion about that. Most companies want to use their own paper, but when you're selling to the largest companies in the world, they likely won't want to use your paper, or the time it will take to get your contract redlined is far too long. And so you'll likely want to start with theirs. That's not something that you'll want to hear or your lawyer will want to hear, but it ends up being true. And then procurement, how much time will your contract sit in procurement? And so this is not about forecasting, but if we were talking about forecasting, you'll want a developed understanding of how long that process takes. So when your seller is forecasting a $100,000 deal to close in the month, and you ask them whether or not the contract is with procurement, and you know the procurement process takes 4 weeks, you're not going to forecast that deal to close, regardless of what your seller is saying. So how might someone navigate a free pilot and turn it into paid? you can't navigate a free pilot and turn it into paid unless you've had that conversation with the prospect prior to the pilot starting. And so I'd say there have to be very clear KPIs that you set forth with the client before that pilot begins. Understanding exactly how they're going to measure success, what value they expect to receive as a result of, what are your expectations from them over the course of the trial, and then what should they expect from you? Maybe it's a kickoff and then a 3-day check-in, 10-day check-in, 14-day check-in, very specific things being done on each of those days. I would say any time that you're going to dedicate resources, whether it's human resources or just technology, to a client, whether paid or unpaid, you definitely want something in return. And so what I would not advocate for is just giving a free trial to anyone who asks. Make sure you qualify the person who wants the trial. You don't have to go too deep into the qualification, but I would get to at least band, budget, authority, need, timing, and make sure that the person that you're delivering a trial to really does have a need. So this question is, how would the process differ if this were like a finals presentation to a board committee? So the process really wouldn't change much. I mean, I think the steps that we laid out here are all the steps that you take before you get to that final presentation. That final presentation, though, you've got to be airtight. Who's going with you to that meeting? Who's taking which part of the meeting? Who's answering which question? Who's overcoming which objection? You know, all the things that we talk about as it relates to sort of any of these meetings are also true in that finals presentation. So I don't know that it would differ much. I think the point that I'm trying to make in getting into that meeting is everyone needs to have a very specific role and responsibility. And if you don't have one, don't go to the meeting. And so the best or most successful finals presentations I've been part of have been choreographed in that way, where sort of the night before we're building the deck, we've got the deck done. We've got 4 or 5 people from our company attending. Each of us knows the very specific role we're going to play, and each of us is responsible for a portion of that meeting. For early stage companies, is it appropriate to offer equity for investment or upfront payment for a large enterprise deal? I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. So I've never been a CEO. I've been a CRO now 4 times. And I think that's really sort of almost a board level decision as to whether or not you want to offer up equity to bring on the first several clients. I can give you an example. So at Percolate, we decided, I don't know, I can't even engage with the audience, so it's difficult to know how much you guys know about Percolate, but Percolate is a marketing technology engine. It's a system of record for marketing. It delivers all of the things that a marketer might need to do inside of one platform. And early days at Percolate, we were getting pushed to the agency, to the ad agencies, because our brand prospects were saying, well, the agency does that for us. And we wanted to be selling direct to the brand. And so we had to think about, how do we move the agency out of our way? And we decided to build a real relationship with a big agency. And so we took on an investment from one of the larger agencies in the world and gave them some equity in our company, and they helped us get direct to brand and get out of the way. Not a perfect answer to your question. I guess the point I'm trying to make is yeah, I think it's a tricky one. I don't love the idea, unless you're talking about a whopper of a deal and a very long-term contract of giving up equity for business. Okay. So there's a question here. How do you work on RFP response into the process? How about blind RFPs? Unless you are supremely confident that you have a really unique product or service, I would stay as far away from blind RFPs as I could for a while. On RFPs, I think a lot of the choreography that I shared may or may not be necessary. So it depends on what got you to the place where they're now giving you the RFP that you can respond to. So if it requires a bunch of meetings, well, then the process that we described in Choreographing the Sale may work, because you need to get to the place where they actually allow you to be part of the consideration set. Regardless, the goal of the response is to get the in-person meeting. And so typically there's like 2 steps to the RFP process. The first step is your response. The second step is the 2 or 3 companies that they've chosen will come in and meet with them in person. And so there's a great book by Tom Searcy, and I just can't think of the name of it. I will share it with the folks at Dream It, and they can send it out when I get back to my office and remember. A great book by Tom Searcy on responding to RFPs, which has really good, rich information in there about what you want to look out for, what might be an indicator that you're just an also ran or another check mark on an RFP, and you're not really being considered. But I think, you know, responding to an RFP in a very specific way and thinking about all of the landmines is really important. So I will share it out. I don't have a, is that by Tom Searcy? Yeah, there it is. It's called RFPs Suck: How to Master the RFP System Once and for All to Win Big Business. Tom Searcy. Thank you for that. So rather than my sharing with you my thoughts on RFP, I would say read the book. It's a really good one. And in my experience, as you get to B round, C round, a little bit bigger, you may want to consider building an RFP response team. We had that at Percolate. We are thinking about building that at AlphaSense. And then beyond that, and this is perhaps some future thinking, you know, how do you get yourself into the consideration set? And I'd say there are a couple of things that you want to do. One of the most important, depending on your industry, is to begin to develop relationships with analysts, Gartner, Forrester. We've had great success in becoming part of the Forrester Wave Report. You've got to win it. You don't want to just be part of it. Forrester Wave Report or the Gartner 4 quadrants, Magic Quadrants. And so I would say if you can begin building relationships with analysts that cover your space, that naturally leads to you being part of the consideration set for big RFPs that come out. Anyway, I'm being told that that's the last question. I really appreciate everyone taking the time and asking all these great questions. I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested offline. And so I will make myself available to all of you, and you can get my email address through Dream It. Feel free to reach out.